"Sir, I'm going to need you to turn that off. We're about to push back." The flight attendant said it with the bright, practiced patience of someone who has said it 1,000 times and who has learned that the saying of it is the entire job. The enforcement is secondary. The tone is the thing. She was 26, efficient, professional, and she was looking at the old man in seat 14C with the particular blend of courtesy and mild exasperation that air travel produces in people who are responsible for large numbers of other people in a sealed tube at altitude. He had a small radio in his lap. Not a phone, an actual radio, the handheld kind, compact, its casing worn to a particular dark polish by years of handling, the antenna slightly bent at the tip from some long-ago incident it had survived. The old man's name was Chester Aldrich Boone. He was 78 years old. He was not a large man, or a small one. He occupied his seat with the specific quality of someone who has spent a great deal of time in confined spaces, and has made a kind of peace with confined spaces that most people never reach. Not resigned to them, but at home in them, the way certain animals are at home in dens. He wore a gray button-down shirt with no insignia, dark trousers, and lace-up shoes that had been resoled recently and maintained carefully. His hair was white and thinning, brushed back from a face that the years had worked on with the particular thoroughness they apply to men who have spent much of their lives outdoors and at altitude. Deep lines, weathered skin, a jaw still carrying the architecture of what had once been a precise and angular face. His hands, resting on the radio in his lap, were the hands that always told the story first, large, scarred across the knuckles of the right hand in a pattern that suggested a canopy release handle grabbed in emergency. Index finger of the left hand slightly misaligned at the second joint. The kind of misalignment that happens when a bone is set in a field rather than a hospital. He looked at the flight attendant with eyes the color of a clear sky at 30,000 feet, pale blue, with a quality of light in them that was not warmth exactly, but was something more durable than warmth. The quality of a man who has looked at distance for so long that distance has become his natural register. "I'll switch to passive," he said. "It won't transmit." "Sir, all electronic devices—" "I know the regulation," he said, not unkindly. "I helped write the civilian adaptation of it in 1987. He clicked something on the side of the radio. A small light changed from green to amber. Passive only. It's listening, not broadcasting. Same as your instrument panel." The flight attendant looked at the radio. She looked at the old man. She made the calculation that flight attendants make 100 times a day, risk assessment, passenger management, choosing battles, and arrived at a decision she would later describe to the colleague in the jump seat as, "I don't know what it was, he just had the kind of face that made arguing feel pointless." "We'll be at cruising altitude in about 20 minutes, she said. "After that, you're welcome to use approved devices." "Thank you," Chester Boone said. He turned to the window as the jetway disconnected and the aircraft began its slow backward roll from the gate. Below him, the tarmac of Joint Base Andrews spread in its familiar geometry. The hardstands, the fuel lines, the distant shapes of parked aircraft against the flat Maryland horizon. He had last flown out of Andrews in a different capacity, in a different aircraft, and the geometry had been the same and everything else had been different, and he allowed himself one quiet moment of looking before he let it go. The woman in 14B had been watching him with the peripheral attention of a fellow passenger assessing the situation. The radio. The exchange with the flight attendant. The old man's response. She was perhaps 35, in civilian business clothes, with the particular composed alertness of someone who traveled frequently and observed things. Her name was Sandra Price. She was an investigative journalist for a defense publication, though this fact was not visible on her, and she had been seated in 14B for reasons having nothing to do with the man in 14C until approximately 30 seconds ago, when she had registered the radio, the hands, the eyes, and the comment about helping write the civilian adaptation of a regulation in 1987, and had quietly revised her morning's agenda. She did not introduce herself. She watched. The aircraft taxied. The safety demonstration proceeded. Chester Boone watched the flight attendant's demonstration with the attentiveness of a man who takes safety demonstrations seriously, because he has been in enough situations where the details of an emergency procedure were the difference between outcomes, and the 2 decades since his retirement have not altered that particular reflex. The aircraft entered the runway, paused, then the engines built from a steady push to the full commitment of takeoff thrust, and the aircraft accelerated in the way that aircraft accelerate, not gradually, but with the gathered intensity of something that has been designed to do exactly this and has been waiting for permission, and lifted. Chester Boone, as the ground fell away, closed his eyes for 3 seconds. It was not the closing of someone afraid of flying. It was the closing of someone for whom altitude is still, decades later, where some essential part of them lives. He opened them. He looked at the radio in his lap. The amber light held steady. 40 minutes into the flight, at cruising altitude over the Virginia-Maryland border, Chester Boone became aware, because he was still, at 78, exactly the kind of aware that 23 years of combat flying had made permanently structural, of a change. It was not a sound available to the other passengers. It was, at 37,000 feet above the Appalachian foothills, entirely below the threshold of what the interior of a commercial airliner communicates to the people inside it. But Chester Boone heard it in the way he heard everything at altitude, not with his ears first, but with the distributed attention of a man for whom an aircraft's behavior had once been the difference between his continued participation in the world and its alternative. 2 aircraft. Parallel, matching speed. Close, much closer than separation minimums, and they had been there for perhaps 90 seconds before he registered them, which meant they were not random traffic. He looked at the amber light on the radio. Sandra Price, who had been watching him from 14B with the patient observational attention of someone who does this professionally, saw his expression change. Not dramatically. The change was in the eyes, a focusing, a specific quality of attention that was different from the general attentiveness she had been watching for the past 40 minutes. The eyes of someone who has just received information. His hand moved to the radio. He held it. He did not change the setting. He was listening. She could not hear what he was hearing. She was certain, from the quality of his stillness, that he was hearing something. In the cockpit, Captain David Osei had just received a communication from Washington Center that had made him, a man who had been flying commercially for 16 years after 8 in the Air Force, and who was not in the habit of being surprised at altitude, look at his first officer and say that again. Washington Center said it again. Captain Osei looked at the sky ahead of him and then at the sky to the left, where, in his peripheral vision through the cockpit window, a gray shape was keeping pace with them at a distance that was professional and exact. He said, "Is this an exercise?" Washington Center said it was not an exercise. Captain Osei said, "Then I need to understand what you're asking me to do." Washington Center explained what they were asking him to do. Captain Osei sat with this for a moment. Then he told his first officer to hold heading and altitude, and he unstrapped, and he walked out of the cockpit and down the aisle of the aircraft with the particular quality of forward motion that causes passengers to track a person without knowing why. He stopped at row 14. He looked at the man in seat 14C with the gray shirt and the worn radio and the hands. He said, "Sir, are you Chester Boone?" Chester looked up at him. "I am." Captain Osei looked at the radio. He looked at Chester's hands. He looked at the pale blue eyes. "We've received a communication from Washington Center," he said, quietly, for the row only. "There are 2 aircraft flying escort. They've been with us for about 4 minutes. Washington Center is relaying a request." He paused. "The request is from the escort flight leader." Chester was still. "They want to know," Osei said, and his voice had taken on the quality of a man who is conveying something he does not fully have the context for, but who understands that the context is significant, if the passenger in seat 14C is who the tail number registry says he is. "The aircraft that filed the flight plan today, yours, sir, has a secondary identifier in the FA's historical registry. From a long time ago." The escort lead says, he looked at a note on his phone, he says the identifier is Reaper 1. He says his grandfather flew with Reaper 1 in the Gulf. He's asking permission to. Osei stopped. "Read the note again." "He's asking permission to execute a traditional escort acknowledgement." The woman in 14B had stopped pretending to read her laptop. Chester Boone looked at the captain. He looked at the window. Outside, at a distance that was close enough to be intentional and far enough to be correct, a gray shape moved against the pale sky. An F-35. Its canopy catching the morning sun in a single flat point of light, moving with the particular purposeful grace of an aircraft that has been told where to be and is exactly there. "You can tell him yes," Chester said. His voice was the same, low, unhurried, the voice of a man for whom a great many remarkable things have happened, and who has learned that the appropriate response to a remarkable thing is a complete and genuine attention, not a performance of reaction. Osei nodded. He walked back to the cockpit. Sandra Price, who had been listening to every word of this exchange with the concentrated attention of someone who has trained herself to hear and retain conversations she is not part of, looked at the old man in 14C. He was looking out the window with those pale 30,000-foot eyes, and his hands were folded in his lap over the radio, and his face was the face of a man encountering something he had not expected and is receiving with the careful fullness it deserves. "She said, Mr. Boone." He turned. She introduced herself. Her name, her publication, 2 words that placed her professionally. Chester looked at her for a moment. "You've been watching me since the gate," he said, not an accusation. "Since the radio," she said. "I'm sorry. Occupational habit." She paused. "Who is Reaper 1? Chester was quiet for a moment. Outside, the second F-35 had moved into visibility on the right side of the aircraft, matching speed, matching altitude, positioned with the mathematical precision of a formation that had been briefed and practiced. The 2 aircraft were not flanking the airliner in any aggressive sense. They were accompanying it. The distinction was technical and also, in some fundamental way, everything. It was a call sign, Chester said. A long time ago. Whose? He looked at the window, at the shape of the aircraft keeping pace in the pale sky. "Mine," he said. Sandra Price had her notebook out. Not her phone, her notebook. The paper kind, because some things deserve the deliberateness of a pen. She said, "Can I ask how long ago?" Chester thought about this. He thought about the calculation, not the dates, which he knew precisely, but the distance between then and a gray shirt in seat 14C on a commercial aircraft over Virginia. The distance between what he had been and what he appeared to be now. The distance that the escort aircraft outside were somehow, today, refusing to honor. He said, "The first time I flew under that call sign was 1971, over North Vietnam." He looked at the radio in his lap, the amber light held. The last time was 1991. Over Iraq. Sandra's pen moved. 20 years, she said. 23, he said. I flew the last mission 6 weeks after I was supposed to have retired. They needed someone who knew the ingress route. Outside, the F-35 on the left side of the aircraft executed a maneuver. Small, precise, a slight waggle of the wings, the specific controlled oscillation that in aviation means a great number of things depending on context, and in this context, in this company, meant one thing specifically. The pilot in that aircraft, whose grandfather had flown with Reaper 123 years ago in the sky above another desert, was doing the only thing available to him at 37,000 feet to say what he meant. Chester Boone watched it. Something moved across his face that was not emotion in the way that word is usually used. It was deeper and quieter than that. The movement of something in a man who has been still for a long time when a door opens onto a room he thought was closed. "He's saluting you," Sandra said, quietly. "Yes," Chester said. He looked at the wing waggle until it was complete. Then he looked at his hands. His grandfather's name was Captain Louis Ferreira. 79th Fighter Squadron. He was 24 years old when we first flew together. First Gulf War. He was a pause of the particular kind that happens when a man is deciding how much of something to give to someone he has just met. He was the best wing I ever had. She let the pause be a pause. This was one of the skills of her profession that she valued most, the ability to be still in the presence of someone else's silence. "He died in 2019, Chester said. I went to the funeral. I sat in the back." He looked at her. His grandson was there. "I didn't introduce myself. I didn't know if he knew who I was. I didn't want to make it about me." He looked back at the window. Apparently, Louis told him. Outside, on the right side of the aircraft, the second F-35 matched the maneuver. Another waggle, precise and controlled, and completely deliberate. The wing returning the salute of the first, or extending it, it was, Chester thought. Something the pilots had briefed between themselves, this small ceremony in the sky, this act of recognition conducted at 540 knots above the Appalachians while the passengers in the cabin remained largely unaware that anything was happening. Captain Osei had returned to the cabin. He was standing in the forward galley, watching row 14. Flight attendant Maya Torres, who had been in the rear galley attending to the drink service, and who had been told by her colleague at the front that something was happening in the middle of the cabin and should be aware of it, had moved forward and was standing at the galley curtain. She was looking at the window on the left side of the aircraft, where the F-35 was visible to anyone who was looking, a gray shape against the pale sky, moving in perfect company with them, going exactly where they were going at exactly the speed they were going, which was not a thing that happened on commercial routes for reasons unrelated to ceremony. She looked at the old man in 14C. She looked at the radio in his lap, the amber light steady. She looked at his hands. She had been the one to ask him to turn off the device at the gate. She thought about that. She thought about the easy confidence of his response. I helped write the civilian adaptation of it in 1987, and about the way she had made her calculation and moved on. She thought about the hands on the radio, the misaligned finger, the scar on the knuckle. She took her phone out of the galley pocket and typed 4 words into a search bar. Reaper 1 fighter pilot. The first result was a 2017 Air Force Historical Archive article. The headline was, "The Longest Confirmed Aerial Combat Career in Air Force History, The Story of Reaper 1. She read the first 3 paragraphs. Then she walked forward to where Captain Osei was standing. "Captain," she said. He looked at her. She showed him the phone. Osei read the 3 paragraphs. He looked at the phone for a moment. He looked toward row 14. He said, "Make sure his drink is fresh." He walked back to the cockpit. What Captain Osei did next was not in any standard operating procedure. He did it because he had 8 years in the Air Force before his commercial career, and because he had a specific understanding of what the words on Torres's phone meant, and because there is a category of action that falls between procedure and obligation. And in that category, a man makes a choice based on what he believes is right rather than what he has been told to do. He keyed the PA. Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain. I want to ask for your attention for one moment. He paused. We are currently being escorted by 2 F-35 aircraft from the 114th Fighter Wing out of Joe Foss Field. This is not a security situation. You're welcome to look out the windows on both sides of the aircraft. They're with us. And they've been with us for the last several minutes by request. In the cabin, heads turned. People leaned toward windows. A child in row 7 said those are fighter jets in the voice of someone for whom this is the best possible development in a morning. The escort, Osei said, was requested for a specific reason. There is a passenger with us today whose service record I have just been briefed on by Washington Center, and whose call sign, Reaper 1, was recognized by the flight leader of our escort. He paused. I won't use his name without his permission. But I can tell you this. Between 1971 and 1991, this passenger flew 312 combat missions across 3 conflicts. He holds the record for the longest confirmed combat aerial career in Air Force history. He has been decorated with the Air Force Cross, 2 Silver Stars, the Distinguished Flying Cross with 7 oak leaf clusters. He looked at the paper Torres had brought him. 4 Air Medals, 3 Purple Hearts, and the Congressional Medal of Honor awarded 1973 for actions over Hanoi in which he, alone, drew the fire of 6 surface-to-air missile batteries to protect an 8-aircraft strike package that would otherwise have been destroyed on ingress. All 8 aircraft completed their mission. All 8 came home. In seat 14B, Sandra Price had stopped writing, not because she had run out of things to write, because some moments are too large for the pen to keep pace with. The escort pilots outside our windows, Osei continued, are performing a traditional aerial acknowledgement, the wing waggle you may have seen, which is the aviation equivalent of a salute. They asked his permission. He gave it. Another pause. I'm asking the cabin to join them. The aircraft was quiet for 3 seconds. Then a woman in row 4 started clapping. Not the polite, uncertain applause of a captive audience asked to perform appreciation, but the real kind. The kind that starts in the chest and works its way out. It was joined immediately, then completely, the sound filling the cabin from the forward bulkhead to the aft galley. And the child in row 7 was clapping harder than anyone, and the man in row 18 who had served 3 tours in Fallujah and who had boarded this morning with the specific invisible weight that does not come off when you change out of the uniform was on his feet before he had consciously decided to stand. And then others were standing. And the standing moved through the cabin in the particular way that standing moves through a room when it is genuine rather than obligatory. Chester Boone sat in seat 14C with the radio in his lap, and the amber light steady and the pale blue eyes looking at the window where one of the 2 F-35s was visible against the morning sky. His face was doing the thing it had done when the first wing waggle came, that deep, quiet opening. The door into the room he had thought was closed. He was not crying. He was not composed against crying. He was simply and completely present in the moment, receiving it with the full attention it deserved, which was the only form of gratitude he had ever known how to give. Sandra Price, in 14B, did not applaud. She watched him. She understood that watching him was the more important task, and she was correct. Because the expression on Chester Boone's face at 37,000 feet, with 2 F-35s on his wings and a cabin of strangers on their feet, was the expression of a man who has spent decades in the back row of his own story and has just been told, by the sky itself, that the story was always known. He turned from the window. He looked at her. Something in the look was a permission. She said, "Luis Ferreira's grandson." "What's his name?" Chester looked at his hands. "I don't know his first name," he said. "Louis always called him Little Lou." She wrote that down. "He's going to want to meet you," she said. "I know," Chester said. "I'll be ready this time." Outside, the F-35s held their position for another 4 minutes. Then, one at a time, they climbed, the smooth, committed climb of aircraft doing what they were built for, departing the commercial lane and ascending into the higher sky with the ease of things that belong there. The last one, on the left side, executed one final waggle as it climbed, a single, clean oscillation, small and precise and absolutely deliberate, the period at the end of the sentence they had been writing since they joined the formation. Chester watched it climb until it was a point of light, and then nothing. He looked at the radio in his lap. He clicked it from amber back to green. Not to transmit, just because some things deserve to be returned to the state they were built for. The story found its epilogue 3 weeks later, not at altitude, but at sea level, in the unassuming parking lot of a diner in Alexandria, Virginia, on a Tuesday morning in October when the leaves were in the particular argument between green and gold that means autumn is not arriving but has already arrived and is simply taking its time about being acknowledged. Chester Boone was inside at a corner booth when the door opened and a young man walked in, compact, in his late 20s, wearing civilian clothes with the residual posture of someone who has spent years in a cockpit. He looked around the diner with the evaluating sweep of a pilot scanning airspace. His eyes found Chester. He walked to the booth and held out his hand. "Mr. Boone, I'm Lou Ferreira, Louis's grandson." He paused. "My grandfather told me about you for as long as I can remember." Chester took his hand. The grip was the grip of a pilot, the controlled strength of hands that have held a stick through things that required controlled strength. He held it for a moment. "Sit down, son," he said. They sat across from each other in the corner booth of the Alexandria diner while the October morning pressed gentle light through the window. And they talked for 2 hours about Louis Ferreira, about the way he flew, about the things he had said in the cockpit, and the things he had said after, about the specific, irreplaceable quality of a man who is at his best at altitude, and who carries that altitude in him on the ground so that being near him always feels like being in clearer air. Chester talked about Louis in the way that old men talk about lost friends when they have finally found someone to talk to, with the care and precision of someone who has been maintaining something in private for a very long time and is only now learning how to share the maintaining. Lou Ferreira listened the way young men listen when they understand they are receiving something that cannot be replaced. At the end, Lou said, "He used to say that flying with you was the only time he never thought about altitude. He said you made the sky feel like the safest place in the world." Chester was quiet for a moment. "He made it true," he said. "That's what a good wing does. He made it true." He looked out the window. The sky above Alexandria was the pale blue of a clear October morning, not the 30,000-foot blue, not the operational blue, but the ordinary blue of a world that is still, on good days, genuinely beautiful. The radio was in his jacket pocket. The amber light was off. He was, for the moment, simply a man in a diner booth, drinking coffee with someone else's memory of a friend. It was enough. It was more than enough. It was the thing that the missions were for, in the end, not the decorations, not the record, not the entry in the archive. This, a corner booth. A grandson, the sky outside, going on. There are men who have been the reason other men came home, who have asked for nothing in return, who have folded their history into the space of a seat on a commercial aircraft and looked out the window at a sky they once owned. The sky remembers them even when we forget. Occasionally, in the way of things that are true, it finds a way to say so. If you were moved by Chester's story of quiet courage and timeless grace, hit that like button. Share this video with someone who needs to see it. And be sure to subscribe to Veterans Valor for more stories of America's unassuming heroes. Script generated using the Veterans Valor Master Script Framework. Word count: Naya 4,300 words.